time to get started. So I believe there are a few folks on the call today that haven't joined before, so I thought I'd start by introducing myself and the purpose of these calls, and then we'll get into the discussion for today. So I'm Katie Baildon. I'm part of the communications team at Extension Administration. And we have these monthly calls. They're an opportunity to share information to those throughout the system that are doing communications work. That might be having a training or kind of a panel like we're doing today, or sometimes we have more discussion-based calls. So the invites go to the CCE Communicators listserv. They're also posted in the Extension Insider newsletter and on the CCE staff site. So there's many ways to engage with this group. For those of you on the call that aren't part of the CCE listserv, I will reach out probably early next week to invite you to join if you're interested in getting direct invites to your email about these calls. So today we are having a podcasting panel. Well, actually, before I do that, I encourage everyone to use video if you have it. Helps to create kind of a more personal environment. You're also welcome to unmute yourselves and speak up with questions or input that you have throughout today. And of course, you can use the chat box if you're more comfortable with that. So for today, we have, let's see, I'll count beforehand, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people, including myself, that are talking about our podcast experiences. So I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves. I think we have everyone on. I can see, let's see, let me just look at the list real quick and make sure everybody's here. All right, so we have Carrie, we have Ethan, and Paul and I are in the room together, and I believe RJ is calling in. So I think, and then Marylynn, did we see her log in here?
I'm here, I'm just not on video.
Okay, hi.
Hi.
All right, thanks for joining, all of you. I'm going to let the panelists all introduce themselves, but before we get started, I would like to thank them all very much for joining today to share their expertise in podcasting. So the format is we have a series of questions laid out that we each received in advance to kind of think about. So that we're each going to answer all of those questions kind of one by one. So I'll read the question, we'll go around and provide our input on those questions. And we have, I don't know, a handful of questions, so we'll probably have some extra time towards the end of the call for just an open Q&A. And if questions pop into your mind when we're in the middle of the preset questions, feel free to shout them out or put them in the chat box. This is a pretty informal format, so don't hesitate to participate. All right, so I'm just going to move on to the next slide here. So I'm just going to go down the line here, starting with Carrie. Could you please introduce yourself and your podcast and a little description of what your podcast is? I think you're still muted, Carrie.
Okay, how's that?
Perfect.
Okay, hi, I'm Carrie Chalmers. I'm Communications Director for the Bronfenbrenner Center for Translational Research in the College of Human Ecology. And our podcast is called Doing Translational Research. It is an interview style podcast. It's hosted by our center director. It highlights the work of people, mostly researchers, but also some practitioners who are involved in translational research. And in each episode, we kind of get a glimpse of someone's current work and findings, and then also how they do translational research. So how they engage with other stakeholders, policymakers or practitioners, or if it's a practitioner, how they engage with researchers. And then also any information they'd want the general public to know from their findings. And most episodes are 20 minutes or less, and it's sort of got a casual conversational style.
Very good. Thanks so much for joining, Carrie.
Yeah.
And Ethan?
Hey, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Great. So I'm Ethan Grundberg. I'm a regional vegetable specialist with Cornell Cooperative Extension's Eastern New York Commercial Horticulture Program. My colleagues and I started the Eastern New York Vegetable News podcast last March, and it kind of has two different formats. Over the winter, we have kind of an interview, two-person interview style format where we talk about some of our research results from the previous season that may be of interest to growers in our region. And then this time of year, what we've done is we're on an every other week schedule, releasing a podcast on alternating weeks with our written newsletter, trying to cover kind of the same content. So we usually have 6 contributors individually recording segments on usually technical production related information that we then lean very heavily on our technician, Nate Mangaziel, to weave together into a unified podcast that is usually around 35 minutes in length. Did I cover all the basic questions to get started?
Yes, thank you very much. Excellent. All right, so we're next. Paul, you want to introduce yourself and our podcast?
Hi, I'm Paul. I co-host Extension Out Loud with Katie, and we've been doing it for about a year now, coming up on our year anniversary. What else do we need to say about it?
What it is, and so I mean I can do that. So
Go right ahead.
So it's an interview style podcast. So we host at least one, often several experts that can be specialists, educators, faculty, researchers, and we talk about their work and how it impacts New York State. And we try to keep our sessions to 20 minutes or less, although we tend
Mixed success on that.
we tend to not follow our own rule very well.
That's right. So yeah, and so we try to highlight some of the work that Extension is doing across the state, as well as how it connects to partners here on campus, just to sort of make it a little more transparent how we do our business, I think.
And RJ, I don't know if you're out there, anything to add? RJ also helps us produce the Extension Out Loud podcast and promote.
Yeah.
Oh, you sound.
Yeah, I'm unreliable cell service.
Okay, well, feel free to chime in, but your audio is kind of weird.
How many people? So Kenneth asked how many people are involved in the production of each podcast. We here on campus, we have a staff of 2.
Well, 3. RJ
Three.
is heavily
RJ.
involved.
Well,
in the,
yeah. But I mean, as far as the actual, there are a couple different elements of production. So one is the actual technical aspect, and one is the other parts of the development of questions and invitations for guests and things like that. So our team of 3 pretty much covers that. I handle most of the technical production. I don't know I'd be interested to know what Carrie does. We know Ethan mentioned they have somebody who works on the technical end of theirs. So I'm going to kick it back to Carrie.
Okay. Yeah, I do all of the technical production, and then the director and the admin assistant in the center do the scheduling of speakers. Once in a while I have a speaker idea, but mostly the director sort of thinks up people who would be good. We do have a script. I know that's something that's coming up. So there isn't a lot to do in terms of prep for each episode. We sort of follow the same format. But I do so it's sort of 2 to 3 people, I guess, I would say.
Great. So before we've got a couple more questions in the chat box, but before we get to them, I want to make sure that we have a chance for Marylynn to introduce herself and her podcast.
Okay. Thank you, Katie. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Marylynn Collins. I serve on the ag team here in Oneida County as dairy and livestock educator. And it was after viewing the CCE system-wide conference back in mid-April timeframe that Katie and Paul put on that encouraged me to try my hand at podcast creation. So from that webinar that I viewed, I got the nerve up and created iFarm Oneida, which sits on podcast. It's still very much in its infancy. We've only been going since May. It's myself and my co-worker, Jeff Miller. It is an interview format so far with a focus on Jeff's weekly crop reports that goes out specifically to our ag community, primarily dairy and field crop audience here in Oneida County, sharing timely harvest tips and kind of giving the green light to producers to get their hay down, things of that nature, but hoping to branch out to other dairy related topics in the near future here. So,
Very good. Thank you.
It's always nice to know that some of our sessions do actually have an impact. So thanks, Marylynn.
Yeah, I thought it was great. It was very informative and made it seem very attainable, and podcasts are. So it's a fun way to expand on our programming here. So thank you guys for making the time to present that.
Of course. And actually, not to plug ourselves too much, but I pulled up the URL for the recording from that session, just in case anyone's interested in going back and looking at it. So here's the link to the recording. There's some resources, links to some resources, and the link to the slides from that session, if you're interested.
I got them close right. You will.
Get back to full screen here. All right. Great. So let's see. While we are talking about our teams and the editing process, there's a question about how long it takes to edit. And I see, Ethan, you answered about 3 hours per episode. What would you say for?
The editing process really is variable. If you have multiple guests, it becomes more complicated. Also, if you don't pre-plan, it can be wildly complicated. So we've gotten in the habit of really trying to organize ourselves so that when we come to editing, it's much easier. But I think for every hour of audio, I probably spend 7 or 8 hours slicing and dicing just to get it to something usable. But I get a little obsessive sometimes, so you don't have to take that much time.
Carrie or Marylynn, any input on the editing time frame?
On my end, again, being very new at this, and our podcast probably average in time to 15 to 25 minutes at most. So I have not jumped into the editing realm yet as of this point, right, wrong, or indifferent, but I'm sure that day is coming. That's, again, another learning curve for me to approach. So can't really speak to that at this point, but I guess I would be interested in hearing at some point from others today, you know, what are those editing tools that they are using to accomplish that task?
Yeah, we'll definitely get to that.
So yeah, ours is set up to really be like a conversation that you're hearing that just sort of flows as it happens. Mm-hmm. So I really just edit the beginning and the end most of the time, and it takes, you know, half an hour. Once in a while, somebody doesn't like an answer and they want to restart, or there was some weird sound thing happened and I have to go in and cut things a little bit. But usually my editing is really fast.
Very good.
Just me.
You enjoy the playing with audio part of things, so. All right, so I think I'm gonna there's a few more questions in the chat that I'm gonna sort of weave into the questions that we already have set. So next, perhaps most importantly, the question is, where can we find everyone's podcasts? So Carrie, I'll let you start again.
Sure, we're on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Stitcher right now.
Very good.
And we're on SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and TuneIn Radio.
Yeah.
Hi Farm Oneida sits on SoundCloud currently.
And yeah, the Eastern New York Veg News podcast is on all those except for Spotify. And then we were able to work with our webmaster to get the RSS feed to actually populate our homepage as well. So if you log on to our ENYCHP website, there's a section where it just has our most recent couple of podcast episodes available for listening.
Very good. And so one question that came in related to that is there any cost to get on Spotify? No, you just have to pull the RSS. So every podcast is hosted somewhere. I think all of us are using SoundCloud for our hosting platform, and you can generate an RSS feed from that, upload it to a Spotify form, and then I think it was pretty quick for us. Like within a day or so, we were added. So it's pretty easy. And related to that question is, well, a few things. So what prompted each of you to start your podcast, and when did you start it? If most of us, I think, have already answered that question, but if you haven't, add in how long you've been doing it. So what prompted you to start, how long you've been doing it, and then how you picked the platform that you're primarily uploading your content to. So yeah, Carrie, if you wouldn't mind starting again.
Sure. We're in our 4th year, where it's been like, a little over 3 years. We wanted just another way to reach people and to have a way to showcase people that are affiliated with the center doing research, interesting visitors that were coming in. And we wanted to have conversations about how translational research actually happens, both for other researchers who are doing translational research or for people to understand how it works. And also CCE staff and educators were definitely one of our target audiences, because the podcast gives you a little snippet of a lot of research that's going on, sort of from a perspective of how is this useful to communities, how is it being translated so that communities can use it faster, and how are communities involved in research. And of course, we just saw a podcast as another way that people could just listen to. It would be quick while they're doing other things. It's just, sort of hits a different mark communications wise than visual, like newsletters and the website and that sort of stuff. I feel like I forgot one of the questions.
Oh, sorry.
We chose the platforms.
Yeah.
I think, SoundCloud just seemed the most convenient and user-friendly in terms of the actual hosting platform.
Mm-hmm.
And then, 3 years ago, I picked Stitcher and iTunes as other ones to also index it, but I'll probably just need to update. I would put it everywhere, basically. So I just need to update to get it onto Spotify and a few other places.
Great. And Ethan?
Yeah, so there were, I guess, kind of 2 primary factors that influenced our decision-making around trying to start podcasting. One was doing a better job of reaching our demographic that's already engaged in our programming and already has an established relationship with the Eastern New York Commercial Horticulture Program team. But some of the feedback that we've received over the years is that a weekly newsletter, though perhaps useful, gets to be too much for a farming community who's out in the field for most of the summer. And some don't have email access, which also begs the question of whether they're going to be accessing podcasts as well. But we basically heard from growers that they're busy, they don't have time to sit down and read a newsletter every week. So we thought that we could put it in audio format, have it available to them while they're busy, doing tillage in a tractor or doing seeding in a greenhouse, that perhaps they could still get that information without having to actually sit down and read it. And the other kind of motivation was, it seems like a lot of new farmers and younger farmers are relying very heavily on sort of farmer-to-farmer information networks. And so there is a proliferation of agricultural podcasts out there, very few of which are affiliated with research institutions or universities. So I have listened to many of those in my years, and sometimes am a little disappointed in the technical content. And so it seemed like there was kind of an opening to perhaps reach that new farmer audience that we don't have as strong of a relationship with more technical content that perhaps they're not getting through their other agricultural podcasts. And then to echo what Carrie said, yeah, Spotify seemed to be the easiest option for us in terms of a host. And then by it automatically generating that RSS feed, once you kind of get everything set up, it's fairly easy to broadcast that and have it automatically update on all those other platforms. In Katie's question in the chat, we seem to get the most hits and listens from Apple iPhone listeners just using their podcast app on their phone.
Hey, Ethan, can I just jump back? You said Spotify, but you probably meant SoundCloud?
I meant SoundCloud, yeah, sorry. I confused all of them. Yes, thank you.
Just wanted to, I thought if you were doing something really unique, we'd like to know about it. But
no, we are not doing anything with SoundCloud.
So we started, actually the genesis for actually kickstarting Extension Out Loud happened last summer when RJ and I were traveling to do the video for social workshops. And we had time in the car to talk, and we started kicking around the idea. We didn't have anything existent in the audio space. We thought there was an opportunity there to reach an audience in a different way, to also reach a slightly different demographic than our traditional audience. And so we sort of started it up as an experiment with what will happen if we do this. I think we were fairly experimental. The first, we learned a lot in the first few months, I think. But yeah, I think that's the genesis. We just wanted to try to develop something that represented the work of Extension in the overall in the podcast space.
All right, and Marylynn?
Yeah, I guess really it came about from a strong desire to broaden our programming efforts here in the county and trying to find an innovative and new way to reach our targeted audience. Coupled with viewing your system-wide conference on podcasting, just kind of fell into place from there as something new to try. And, we are enjoying producing these and getting them out. And I think now we are ready to take it to the next level of getting a more diverse topics of interviews to put out there. So just, again, forever to, what I'm trying to say is just trying to switch up our programming efforts was the real drive behind it. And SoundCloud, again, from your webinar presentation, sounded easy to learn and get on. So that's why I went with that platform. So.
I just want to jump in. For everybody who is not currently podcasting, not that we're thinking everybody should have one, but Marylynn's example of sitting in on a session at the system conference and then turning around and going and doing it really points to another advantage of podcasting, I think, is it can be a relatively low bar entry into a new social media space, as opposed to video where you have some greater overhead. Audio production really can be a fairly straightforward process that lets you enter into that conversation.
Definitely. And I guess we forgot to answer the question about why you chose SoundCloud. Why did you choose SoundCloud?
Just because everybody cool is on SoundCloud. And you know who the cool people were. Now, SoundCloud's been around for quite a while. It's got a good reputation. It's a solid, stable platform that doesn't really seem to have downtime. You can set up a free account if you're just getting started to sort of learn the ins and outs of setting it up. So again, the entry into that is pretty low. And SoundCloud is just a decent platform.
Right. and to echo what Ethan said, it's pretty easy from there to grab that RSS feed and get
Propagate it.
on a
Yeah.
bunch of the other podcasting platforms. All right, very good. So the next question is another two-parter. We've touched on it in a lot of what we said already, but could you each explain a little bit more who your target audience is and what you're doing to reach that audience? And then the second part of the question is, do you see your audience evolving over time, or do you anticipate that it will evolve over time? And turn it back to you, Carrie.
Okay. Our audiences are Cornell faculty and students, CCE educators and staff, and then I would say outside faculty and students, non-Cornell faculty and students working in or interested in translational research. I guess it's possible. I think we have a lot of room to grow in reaching all of those audiences, so we haven't really thought about expanding to different ones. And I'm not sure right now what those other ones would be. So I think those are the audiences we're working with pretty much.
Do you know what your listenership is like?
I don't actually have data now on demographic data on them.
Mm-hmm.
Each episode there's probably an average of like 300 listens an episode right now.
Gotcha.
So there's a lot of room to grow the audience.
Good. And Ethan.
Yeah, so I think I kind of spoke a little bit to our target demographics.
Mm-hmm.
We historically, as I had mentioned, really leaned heavily on our newsletters, which were even further back, all print newsletters mailed out via snail mail to subscribers or enrollees in our program. In recent years had transitioned to emailed newsletters for the most part, though still giving growers an option to receive a print copy. But we also, I think we kind of poorly and irregularly dabble in Facebook posting and Instagram posting. I think, in terms of who is listening to our podcast that we're putting out, it's been interesting to hear some of the individual feedback. We have some growers who I wouldn't necessarily have expected to be excited about a podcast, who have given us really positive feedback that, for example, they can be working on fixing a tractor implement in the shop and put this on the speaker and listen to that material while they're getting something else done. We also have growers who I don't think have ever listened to a podcast before. And one thing that we do is we try to provide kind of a table of contents for each episode. So if there's a topic that doesn't interest a grower, they can skip ahead to a certain minute mark and listen to a segment that they might be more interested in. But some of the negative feedback that we've received is that no one wants to listen to 45 minutes of content. We try to keep it to 35, but some of my colleagues get a little bit carried away sometimes, never me. So I think that they're just listening straight through and doing nothing else but listening. So I think there's kind of a learning curve in an older farmer audience who isn't maybe as comfortable with the idea of podcast and helping them try to understand how they can engage with the material without just like sitting down at a computer after a long day of work and listening all the way through. That wasn't even answering the question you asked, but I just figured I'd throw that out there.
No, I think that's a really good point, is that whether your audience that you're trying to target is already listening to podcasts or not is kind of really key. And I think in the case of farmers, even though demographics are shifting, there is a generation of farmers where podcasting is a totally brand new thing for them. So that's a really interesting and good point.
Well, and the analog to podcasting for the older generation would be a radio show. Mm-hmm. And you can't skip ahead in a radio show. So
True.
If you're not tech savvy, it's like, well, the radio program's on, now I have to listen to it. Yeah. So, yeah.
So we For Extension Out Loud, our target audience was rather broad. We wanted to reach residents of New York State. I think who we are reaching is a little bit different. I think our primary audience is sort of internal, educators, specialists, researchers at Cornell and CCE. And then I guess we kind of touched on this in that training that we did back in April, but it's pretty difficult to understand who's listening to your stuff. Analytics for podcasts are kind of tricky because of all the various ways that people can listen to podcasts, and then the way that information is collected. So, we don't necessarily have very great information about who's actually listening. So it's my best guess that our main audience is somewhat internal, and then hopefully as we grow that audience and they begin to share it, we'll get more and more folks listening in. I don't know if you have more to add.
I think a lot of it, I think the audience is a lot dictated. Oh boy, that was bad English. I think the audience is dictated by the content in some ways. So currently our most popular episode is the Cornell chicken episode,
Yeah.
which I find hilarious. And that I think is generally reaching more of a public audience as opposed to something that is a little more internally focused.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're still on the sort of a shifting quicksand of audience sort of terrain right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's my 2 cents for that.
Let's see, did we answer the
Marylynn?
questions?
Yeah, so at this point, our targeted audience is really both dairy and field crop producers, again, here locally in our county, and I suppose in time it'll branch out to neighboring counties, as well as the support staff involved in our dairy industry. And we're hoping that we're reaching this group that are comfortable with today's technology and have that smartphone in their hands, and hoping to capture them, when they're in the tractor seat, or they're waiting for the vet to show up, or finishing up calf chores, what have you, and maybe have 15-20 minutes downtime to listen to an episode. Keeping in mind that not everyone has made that switch to smartphones. Every week during the weekly crop reports, again, my colleague Jeff does a written report that goes out in mass email, and within that email is an embedded link to our podcast. So if we're not getting them on the smartphone, we're hoping that they're hitting that link and can view it on their home computer as well. Again, not being at this very long, I can't really say with any confidence what sort of numbers we're hitting, but we're hoping to keep improving as we move forward with this. And was there a second part to the question? I apologize.
I think you got it. It's
Okay.
kind of who's your target audience and how you're reaching them.
Yep.
And then
Okay.
do you anticipate it evolving over time? So what
Okay.
we kind of forgot to mention for Extension Out Loud how we're reaching our audience. So RJ does promotion primarily for it on social media. We did start a mailing list, but we haven't gotten very many people signed up for the mailing list yet. So we need to do a little bit of work growing that. And then we do also include episodes in the Extension Insider newsletter, which is kind of just for an internal audience too, in the hopes that folks will listen and share it wider. And yeah, that's kind of as an administrative audience, we don't really have the captive real citizens out there in the world. We don't really have a captive audience of that. So we're going to work in the future on kind of building out that mailing list and working more on our social media presence to get our listenership up.
There have been a couple of Cornell Chronicle things as well too. Right?
Yes, RJ has written a few articles that have gotten our podcast highlighted, which has been really helpful.
Yeah, that seems to really make a difference. So I think, again, promoting them to local news or local even radio organizations. One thing we've toyed with is the idea of extracting shorter clips and trying to make those available for media services. We haven't successfully done that yet, but that's something that we've talked about. And I think that could be a useful exercise out in the world if you have a local radio station that's looking for content. You know, if you could extract like a 60-second clip from your podcast and provide it to them, they might be able to help you promote as well.
Interesting idea. But I wonder if radios would promote podcasts, though. Kind of like stealing their audience.
It's an interesting question.
Let's try it.
We should try that.
Another thing too that is kind of interesting to point out, I suppose, is we have on the cce.cornell.edu public site, we have a section for multimedia now, and each of the podcasts that we're talking about today is fed to that portion of the website. So periodically new episodes will show up there, and that is grouped along with videos. If you go there, it's multimedia.cce.cornell.edu, or there's a link from the homepage, and you can see what your colleagues are doing in terms of audio and video. So that's another place where you can kind of see a curated glance of CCE's audio and video presence. Okay, talking a lot. So actually the question in the chat box is just perfect, because our next question for the panelists is, how much time does it take you to plan and record? We already talked about editing, but we didn't talk about the time on planning and recording. And then along with that, what equipment are you using for the recording and editing processes? So Carrie.
Okay, so our planning is pretty easy too. We use, I know this is another one of the questions, but we use a script. So there's a set, there's 4 questions that we ask everyone. They get adjusted a little bit if it's not a researcher. And the host, our director, Chris Wildeman, improvises a little bit depending on how the conversation is going, but we don't tailor questions for the guest. So the planning is pretty minimal. I put together a bio that Chris can read at the beginning as the introduction. So what was it? Oh, and then also about equipment. Was that the other part I'm doing?
Yeah, what's the recording process like? What do you use for equipment, and how long does it take?
I use a MacBook Pro and GarageBand to record. I have a Yeti microphone, and I'm considering, so right now we use one mic, and it works okay, but of course it would be better if each person had their own mic. But I had some trouble with GarageBand accepting and acknowledging 2 different mics. So I'm thinking about trying out Audition instead, so that I can go to 2 mics, one for the host and one for the guest. And I guess the recording really just takes as long as the conversation, because we just go straight through. So it's usually 20 minutes or less.
Very good. And Ethan, what is your planning like, and what equipment do you use for recording and editing?
So the planning is pretty minimal, and hopefully that isn't reflected in the quality and content of the podcast. But for the every other week kind of more up-to-date technical information that we're doing during the season, we just basically send around an email every Monday and just get confirmation for subjects that each contributor is going to be focusing on, so that we don't duplicate that. When we're doing the longer format research recap episodes, we do go to the trouble of putting together a draft script, getting some edits back from whoever we'll be speaking with about their research, so we can make sure to capture everything that researcher wants to discuss. But it's probably no longer than 30 minutes of actual prep and planning for the episode. We do use Adobe Audition through the Cornell University software licensing agreement to do all of our recording. And we were actually, one of my colleagues, Laura McDermott, got an innovation grant that we were able to use to purchase recording equipment for all 11 specialists on the team. So everyone got, it's a dual USB and XLR mic just off of Amazon. Audio Technica, I think, was the manufacturer of those. They're on about $70 each. And that was, and then as long that comes with a little microphone stand and all of the cables that you need if you're just going to be using it as a USB mic, which I think is probably a good place to start. We did get one of the Yeti microphones as well, which it seems like does capture a little bit nicer audio quality and is about $105, I think. So, you know, depending on how many you're purchasing, might be worth spending the extra money there. And then all of the editing Nate does do directly in Adobe Audition at this point.
And do you, so each of the contributors, do they record kind of locally and then share the audio with you?
Exactly, yeah. So everyone records their segment and then we all upload it onto Box, and then Nate has access to that and he pieces it all together. I guess, this isn't, again, I'm going to jump around a little bit. Nate has decades of experience with audio editing from his personal band. And had he not been able to bring that skill set to this, I don't think that we realistically would have felt comfortable pursuing it, just because of the reality of how little time we each have to dedicate to our outreach during the peak of the season. So he's able to churn out really high quality results, and also does all of his own audio production for like the little transitional musical bits as well. So he generates that content as well. And then now that he has sort of a bank of all those transitional pieces and intro music all set to go, it makes the final editing go much more smoothly. You know, I mentioned 3 hours editing early on. I think it was probably 5 or 6 when we started, and we've been able to shave it down to about 3 as a result of Nate's skill set. So
cool. All right, were we talking about gear, or was there a preface to that gear part?
Yeah, sorry, I keep grouping questions together, so there's like a series of questions. So the planning process.
The planning process.
I'll start there. So yeah, it sort of varies, because sometimes our episodes are based on a theme and we'll have a few people talking about the theme. And then sometimes we'll have like an expert and we're talking about like their whole body of work. So for the first case is when it's like sort of topic specific. Paul and I will do a little research on that topic and come up with a set of questions. And we usually don't share the questions with the people we're talking to, because, well, we started doing that and we found that people had written down like pretty long-winded answers, and it was kind of obvious that they were reading, and it took away from that conversational quality that we were looking for. So we ended up just sharing like 3 or 4 bullet points with the people we're going to be talking to, and we say like, these are the things we want to talk about. You know, of course they're welcome to plan and make notes and everything, but then it feels a little more conversational because the questions that we have are kind of worded in a different way than those bullet points we sent. So it just kind of preserves that quality. So really the planning is mostly scheduling a time, and if people can come to us or if we can go to them, we sort of need to plan the logistics of that. Or sometimes we do them by Zoom. And then, yeah, doing the research either on the subject or on the people, or both.
When we did our first series, we focused on the Farm Bill, and the research for that was pretty...
Oh, that was kind of intense.
Pretty intense, but it was also a great opportunity to learn a lot about the Farm Bill.
Yeah.
After that, we picked topics that were a little more manageable, I think. Mm-hmm. But the Farm Bill being such an important and timely topic at that point, it was worth us investing. That was a great way for us to start out with a series of episodes that were fairly comprehensive in their coverage of the Farm Bill, and we had some really good guests for that. really, I think one of the most time-consuming parts of the planning process for us is just tracking people down and trying to figure out when the hell they can sit down with us. I think that consumes a lot of time.
Yeah, particularly if we have multiple guests, trying to get everybody together at once is sometimes challenging. Yeah, so the equipment that's used to record and edit.
Okay, so as far as the equipment, I'm a big fan, I'm a big supporter of open source products. So for our editing, I'm still using Audacity, which is a free open source program. Essentially, it's a baby brother to Audition. It does what we want it to do very well, and I'm really comfortable working with it. I've been using Audacity for probably a decade now. So it's what I know, and it's what I use. I mean, Audition is, of course, something we have access to. I'm invested enough time yet in learning how to use it as effectively as I can use Audition. We started out sort of scraping up whatever equipment we had to do our first experiments, and then we invested in a Yeti microphone, which was a great microphone to get us started. It was about $129, I think, and it allows you to put it in the middle of a desk and capture audio from 360. So it's a great way to, low budget, start your audio capture. The quality is very good, and that was our starting point. And from there, we sort of expanded. We met with Bert, I can't remember his name, down at University Communications, who had some tips and advice for us. And since then, we've ramped up to, we have 4 Shure microphones. They come into a Behringer mixer or a Zoom H6 portable audio recorder. And they record individual tracks for each voice so that you can actually really, if you want to edit well, you can separate those voices out, edit, and do a really nice job of trimming things down. The mixer or the Zoom H6 really allows you to adjust levels. So Katie and I, even with the Yeti, we immediately noticed that there's a difference in the loudness of our voices. And that was a pain in the rear to compensate for when you're editing with just one microphone. It captures as one track. But now with Katie having her own microphone and I having my microphone going into a mixer, I can adjust the mix so that Katie is equal to my volume and our guest is also equal to our volumes. So it really solves a lot of problems tweaking the editing by having that. It's not the cheapest solution. The microphones themselves are probably $110 a piece. The mixer is probably another $100, cables, things like that. So you know, $700 or $800 to invest in a setup, but it really gives us very crisp and clear audio when we're doing face-to-face interviews. And then we do use Zoom for remote interviews. The quality it drives me a little batty sometimes because it's not quality I'd love to have, but I think the quality is sufficient and adequate. And if the content is there, people will listen. I think that's the big thing. A lot of this stuff, you know, buying cool equipment is fun and I enjoy doing that, but really it comes down to the quality of the content that you're putting out there. So if you have a limited budget, I would invest in a Yeti microphone and then spend your time developing the research necessary to have good conversations.
Mm-hmm. And also with Zoom, there's like little tweaks that we've found that help to improve the quality. Like if people use a landline to call into the Zoom session, the audio is a little bit better than like if they're on a cell phone or using their computer mic, unless they have a good computer mic. Yeah. There's other things you can do, like have them record locally, and then the audio quality, and then share that recording with you. That's another way we haven't actually done that, but it's another way that you can try to get a little bit better quality.
I really prefer face-to-face conversations. If you can manage to be in the same place with the person, I really think it adds a level of depth that's missing with the distancing effect of Zoom. That's just a personal opinion, but I think it holds out in the quality of our interviews.
All right, so there was our long-winded.
Oh, that's the other thing. I tend to be a little bit verbose and sort of tangential, and that's and Katie's very straightforward and to the point, and so I inflict a lot of the editing pain on myself by not sticking to the script. I just wanted to say that. So if you're very disciplined, you can do it really well, but I like talking to people. And anyways. So Marylynn.
Yes, thanks, Paul. I'll switch it up here and do it in reverse. As far as equipment, when I first did a test run, I did try Zoom with decent quality, I thought, for a first go at it. But more importantly, I see Zoom as a great option for pulling in speakers or guests that aren't in the same room. So I'll definitely keep that feature in mind for future recordings. But for my weekly recordings, I just rely on the recording feature of my laptop. Kind of happened upon that accidentally, and that provides great sound quality. Also went with a USB Blue Yeti microphone. Very pleased with that purchase. Very user-friendly. 4 different features that will accommodate different size groups or the one-on-one interview. So I was pleased with that. And I did at the same time buy a pop filter, though if we're being honest here, I forget to install it every week. So at some point I need to maybe put a sticky note right on the Yeti and say, pop that pop filter on. So just hoping to make some slight improvements to the overall sound quality of these podcasts. As far as planning, I would have to say since doing this back in early May, our planning time is decreasing, but probably averaging a good 45 minutes to 60 minutes, depending on if there's any timely cropping issues we need to address or pertinent information that's pulled from these weekly cropping reports that Jeff Miller does. So on average, probably 45 minutes of planning what we're going to talk about. I do a script for intros and then a closing remarks script, but all the content in between is really kept off the cuff and try to let it flow as naturally as possible with some talking points in front of me to guide the conversation. Did I cover everything in that loaded question?
I think so.
I think so.
Katie was asking what a pop filter is. Katie, plosives, P's and things like that can be very explosive when you're recording them. So a pop filter just sort of mellows the effect of those plosives because it'll peak. If you look in an editing tool, it peaks the audio up and then drops it down, and it's much easier if you can level those out. So that just exists. It can be a piece of styrofoam on the head of a microphone. A dead cat is a similar sort of thing, but that's more for wind. And then we had a question about, did you sign up for SoundCloud Pro? And Brian, yeah, we paid the dollars for the SoundCloud Pro because we knew we were going to go over that 3 hours pretty quickly.
What else do you get with that?
You get better analytics.
Yeah, full stats.
Yeah, which is nice. So yeah, we did invest in a Pro account. And if you do get into podcasting, I think it's worth having. If you're going to take it seriously and plan on doing it, it's worth having that as a thing.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to again smush 2 questions together since we are getting close to the end of our hour. So as the last question for all the panelists, what resources do you recommend for those getting started? And what advice do you have to anyone that's looking to get started with podcasting? Over to you, Carrie.
Okay. I really liked lynda.com, Lynda, for learning the editing software, which I didn't know before. Their videos, instructional videos. And it is, you know, you do have to pay for the service. Cornell has, I'm not sure if you would, if CCE would have access to the free
We
Cornell.
Yep.
Oh, great. So, I mean, people might already be very familiar with Lynda, but that was really good for me to learn how to use GarageBand for editing. And if I switched to Audition, I would probably use that again. So maybe that's my one resource tip. And then I would say in terms of advice, to think about your audience carefully for if you're, you know, going to be launching a podcast, and sort of what you want them to know, or what you're really imparting to them, and if you want them to do anything, what that might be.
Great,
Those are my thoughts.
Ethan?
Yeah, I think I've been listening to a lot of podcasts for a number of years. So I guess one recommendation for someone interested would be to listen to a lot of material and see what else is out there, and what you like and what you think works, and what doesn't perhaps, and what you might be able to improve on. If you can find someone who's had a band for decades and loves audio, all the better. But I do think seriously, and Paul, touched on this for a bit, really focusing on the quality of the audio, not just the content. At least for me and some listeners, it's really distracting, and it's something that we've struggled with, which is we occasionally get contributions from colleagues who have obviously just used their internal laptop mic, and that transition from really crisp, clear audio with an XLR mic to that internal laptop mic. I mean, it makes me cringe and just want to turn off our own podcasts every time that happens. And so I think it's really important to focus on that audio quality component, which means that, you can't just record and plan to release an episode right away. We played around with the materials for a couple months till we really felt comfortable going ahead and recording audio and launching the podcast.
Cool. Even before Carrie answered, I wrote down lynda.com. It is a tremendous resource if you're going to use any of the editing tools we talked about. There is Audition, GarageBand, Audacity. It's something you'll have access to, and if you're really going to get into it at all, it's definitely worth spending a couple hours taking a Lynda course to learn how to use the actual package you're going to use to edit with. That's my sage advice. The other thing is to have fun with it, to not let it become a burdensome thing, but to let it be something that's a source of joy to you to record, because that comes through in your whole approach to the process, and that will be reflected in how you ask the questions and how you engage with people. And so if it's not going to be something that adds to your work life, it's not going to be something that increases your quality of living, and I'm quite serious about this, I wouldn't do it. If you have the time and the motivation and you think you enjoy talking to people, then it's worth doing. But if you're reticent about doing it, or somebody has told you to do it, but you don't really want to, don't do it. Because it does take effort, it does take time, and it does take internal energy. I listened to Marianne Williamson last night at the debates.
I think from my perspective, the most important piece of advice is, and it was a learning experience for me, is to be flexible and experiment a little bit. It's my tendency to be okay, this is our plan, this is what we're doing. All of our episodes are going to be 20 minutes and 0 seconds, whatever. And I think I've learned this from working with Paul, is just that sometimes allowing for that flexibility allows you to see that some things might work really well that you hadn't considered, or maybe that question that you hadn't prepared ahead of time that just pops into your brain is really what's kind of the most valuable or interesting piece of the conversation. So yeah, I think that's my main advice. If you come up with a plan in the beginning and things don't pan out exactly the way you wanted them to, it's fine.
Yeah, and I just want to jump back to what Katie was saying. Have a co-host who compliments you. I can't imagine hosting with somebody who's like me.
Oh my God, it would be hours.
It would be a tangled ball of yarn. So finding a good co-host, someone you can develop a decent relationship with, who complements your strengths, so that you can both have strong things to bring into the mix, is really, it just, again, adds to the pleasure of creating the thing, and it just makes for a better conversation. Sometimes Paul does something unexpected. I hardly ever do unexpected things.
Yeah, right. Okay, over to you, Marylynn.
Yeah, so just briefly reiterating my point from earlier as far as a resource. Again, your guys' webinar from back in April was a great tool to get started with. It was straightforward and to the point and helpful. It had a lot of great resources in that. So I would encourage anybody who's willing to take this on to first view that webinar. And it looks like you're trying to share that link now. So check that out. I poked around a little bit on Lynda and some other podcasting resources just to get some unanswered questions answered, and just decided to dive in. And I couldn't agree more with Paul's comment about if you're co-hosting, to do it with someone you're very comfortable with and well established, because it creates a relaxed atmosphere if you're comfortable working with someone in that manner. And yeah, you could be added strength and they could cover your weaknesses type of approach to it. I guess that's all I have to say on that point.
Cool.
Great, thanks.
How do you get and expand your audience? Expanding is hopefully there's a network amplification effect that eventually kicks in. What do you think?
I don't know. I don't know. I feel like we're the least equipped to answer that question.
Yeah. I would just say, in talking to that, if I could go back and do anything differently, it would be in the earlier promotion and marketing of this podcast to our intended audience. I don't feel we did a great job of getting the word out soon enough so that people could then find the app on their phone and be prepared to have easier access to these initial podcasts. So that's definitely something to keep in mind with this project is how are you going to promote it? What's that time frame, and how best can you market this new resource to your audience? So.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, we are actually 1 minute over time.
Oh gosh.
So we didn't have a lot of extra time for Q&A, but I encourage everyone to reach out. You can reach out to me directly, and if you have questions for the other panelists, I can help to get the questions to them just at cce.communications@cornell.edu. That's the best way to reach out to me, or if you have my direct email, that's great too. I put in the chat box links to each of the 4 podcasts that we are talking about today, as well as the course, the session that Paul and I did at the System Conference earlier this year. If there's any last things that any of the panelists want to say before we adjourn today, please go ahead.
I have something.
Of course you do.
Of course I do. If you're out there and you listen to this now, you think you're doing a podcast, if you'd actually start one up, let us know.
Yes, thank you.
See?
Yes, good point.
So yeah, if you start your podcast, let us know so that we can bring it into the multimedia page and we can follow along and follow you on SoundCloud. Because the more the merrier, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, I would just say thank you for putting this together. It's been a pleasure having this conversation with my fellow podcasters, and I actually have to go record an episode now. So I'm gonna go, but thanks again.
One more
Carrie.
thing before we sign off. Next week we'll be at Empire Farm Days on Wednesday, and we're gonna do a Facebook Live thing, so look for information on that. Katie's frowning at me.
Oh, it is frowning.
Thank you guys for this opportunity. It was very nice. I appreciate it.
Very much for participating, Marylynn.
Yep.
This was fun. And thank you, Ethan.
Yep, thanks. Take care.
Cool. Katie wins the day with her comment about my hair looking good, so I'm not going to cut it. All right. Far out. It's really nice to